Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. I hope you are well wherever you are watching this presentation. Hope 2021 will be better than 2020. But without further ado, let's crack on with this, which is going to be your new topic for the new year, which is radio. So, this, if you remember, goes alongside the first section of paper two, which also includes film, which is specifically the Jungle Book, and Minecraft as well. You'll only get asked on two out of these three topics, so one will be completely redundant. You don't know which one, so you need to revise them all equally. All of them will be worth 15 marks, and all of them should take about 25 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes to write, and the time conditions. So it's exactly the same format as Microsoft and the Jungle Book, so you'll be using the same skills. It's an industrial focus, so just like with Minecraft, you'll be focusing on the games industry, macro before you go micro, focusing on Minecraft. And similarly with the film industry, you go macro, talking about the big players before you focus in on the Jungle Book. For this particular aspect, we are looking at radio as a whole, for macro, and then Radio 1 and the Radio 1 breakfast show from the BBC as your micro focus. So you're going to need something to be taking a lot of notes on. This is quite a research heavy task today, and whether that's a new blog post or whether that's just a pen and paper, whatever it might be, if you can organise yourselves now. The first thing you need to be aware of is this key statement. The mission of the BBC is to act in the public interest, serving all audiences through the provision of impartial, high quality and distinctive outputs and services which inform, educate and entertain. Now, this is the key promise of the BBC, and it's known as inform, educate and entertain is the key or the core focus of the BBC, and they're known as the Reithian values, named after Lord John Reith, who was one of the director generals of the early director generals of the BBC, and he said, overall, regardless of the content, regardless of the format, everything on the BBC has to be either to inform, or educate, or entertain, or all three. So that is the focus of the BBC. That's why it exists, and I think that's the most important thing that you need to realise before we go any further into understanding anything about the radio industry, is when we are looking at the radio, it is dominated by the BBC, and we need to understand then what it takes for it to be, for the BBC's product as a radio service to be successful. It needs to be entertaining, it needs to be educational, it needs to be informative. So your first task is quite a significant task, and it's something that you should have done over the holidays anyway. But I'll give you an opportunity to do this if you haven't done this. But this is a non-negotiable. You must have this completed. This is an audit for a Radio 1 breakfast show, an entire show. And this is an example of what it should look like. So this is from February a couple of years ago, and you'll notice that it starts at 6:30. So the first thing you'll notice is that if you're doing it from 2020 or 2021, it actually starts at 7 o'clock, and we'll discuss why that is in a few slides' time. But what I need you to do is I need you to make this on Excel, and I need you to talk through each aspect, each slot of the show. Now, the shows are readily available on iPlayer. You can choose which show you decide to analyse, but you do need to listen to a whole episode. So that is from 7 o'clock until 10:30. Obviously, you can fast forward if you don't want to listen to the music. That will be a lot quicker for you. But fundamentally, I do need you to highlight and code what happens at the different stages of the show. So if there's talk and discussion, that needs to be in a particular colour. If there is an advert for a BBC show on TV, that needs to be a different colour. If there's a feature, so if it's something that takes perhaps over 5 minutes that Greg James has been building up to throughout the show, then you need to highlight that in a different colour. So this is a significant piece of work which really does need to be done it should have been done already, but it does need to be done as a very bare minimum before the next lesson that you take, because we will be referring to it in detail. And you will be referring to this throughout your study. So it's a really important document. Please do that. But you'll also need to have a look at Ofcom's regulations of radio stations. And that's particularly important with Radio 1 because they are under some pretty strict regulations from Ofcom. So you must also have that detailed for next lesson. So fair warning, please make sure you have your audit complete and the Ofcom regulations complete for your next lesson. One other thing to say, when you are looking at the songs, please do recognise where the songs come from. So are they British? Are they international? Is it an old song or is it a new song? And that will also be important to your analysis. Okay, so on with today's lesson. We need to look broadly at the radio industry. So to start off with, I'll ask you to pause the video in a second and I'll ask you which one do you think is the odd one out and why. So pause the video here and discuss why, or think about what do you think is the odd one out and why. Now obviously you could have chosen any of these for very different reasons. Perhaps you chose Smooth because it exclusively plays music from the 70s and the 80s and almost exclusively plays Phil Collins and a bit of Cher, or maybe you've looked at these other ones to suggest that they are more or they were initially London-centric, but Radio 1 is the odd one out here in terms of the industry, and it's because it's the only station here which is not commercial. It is a public service broadcaster. The BBC is a public service broadcaster. It's a term that you'll become very familiar with, and it is funded by you or your parents who pay their license fee. The rest of these radio stations are all paid by adverts, so you'll notice when you do your audit on Radio 1, there are no adverts, no commercial adverts for anything outside of the BBC. And that's because it's a public service broadcaster. It is not funded commercially, it's funded through the license fee. So what is a public service broadcaster? So this is where you need to be taking some notes here, please. So the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, it is a public service broadcaster, or what we'll refer to now as a PSB. And it is not controlled by the government, but it's paid for by you and I, by the TV license fee that everyone pays each year per household, which is currently £154.40. Now that can go up and down, but that's what it is at the moment as I record this at the end of 2020. If you listen to the TV or the radio, then you must pay this license fee per year. And there are a number of different payment options to make sure it's affordable for all. You can do it by direct debit, or if you're over 75, there are contingencies in place to make it affordable for all people. Interestingly, it's only £52 if you have a black and white TV license, and there is a pretty hefty fine if you are found not to have a TV license, which is pretty important for you guys, as and when you go off to university. There is no concession for you being a student. You still have to get a TV license, so do remember that, otherwise you might get a knock on the door by the license people. So fundamentally, it's important that you recognise that with the different funding methods between the commercial stations and the BBC, their values are different because they are funded in a different way. If a commercial radio station is to get as many people to listen so that they can sell more adverts, the BBC's is different because it's not funded in the same way. And as a result, they have a different focus and they can afford to do things very differently. So the range and depth on Radio 1 is very different from an Absolute Radio or a Smooth Radio, and that is because it is supposed to be representative of all the people who pay the license fee. So it has to be representative of somebody in the south, on the Isle of Wight, in Wales, up in Scotland. It has to represent the nation as opposed to one small part of the country, which is very difficult to do. So they continue to support new music through Radio 1, and I'll talk about the playlists in a second, but they do try, because it's on the same medium as a lot of these commercial stations, they have to be competitive, but they don't compete in the same way as the other commercial radio stations do. They don't play the same music over and over again. They have to do something different, which we will come on to in a second. Do recognise, though, that the BBC is a enterprise which is competing for your attention, just like Netflix, just like Disney Plus, just like Spotify, and they're very aware of how media is changing. More than half of us now watch TV or films while in bed. A fifth watch TV, etc., while commuting, although commuting is going down rapidly in these strange times. And many of us read news while in bed, while commuting, and also, disturbingly, while in the bathroom. So this changing media sphere means that the way that we consume media is very different. So over to you now. You've got some research to do for me, please. The fundamental question is this: how many people listen to the radio in the UK? And that's on a regular basis, and you can use this as a percentage or you can do it as numbers. It does not matter. But fundamentally, this answer will be the start of any question you get on Radio 1. So remember, we're going from macro to micro, so the first sentence has to be X percentage of people listen to the radio on a weekly basis regularly. So that's your first question. Can you please go ahead and do that research now and see what you come up with? So a little bit of research that I did suggests that almost 90% to 88% of people tune into the radio every week. And it might even be higher now, given that people are turning to the radio even more while we're in this sort of pandemic, and turning to the radio for company, for information, for entertainment, and for escapism as well. Okay, so now we've looked at the whole of the radio sphere. Now it's your job to have a look at some of the competition. So I'd like you to choose one of these radio stations. It's up to you which one you choose. And I'd like you to try and find out this information about them. So listener figures, the funding methods and allocations, the hosts, the missions, what's changed over time. So have the personalities changed? Have the times changed? What's the audience and the reach? Is it local? Is it national? Who are the people that you're targeting in terms of age, gender, demographics? Is there a playlist? What sort of music do they play? What sort of features do they do, etc.? So it's quite a exhaustive bit of research here. If you are in school in the future, we'll be looking to compare some of these. So your peers and your classmates will be doing Capital or Absolute, while you may have chosen Magic or Planet Rock. So you'll have a good overall appreciation of the industry once you return back to school. But it's important that you do this wider industry research. So can I ask you to go ahead and do that now? Choose your radio station and try and focus. And if you want to not necessarily focus on the radio station as a whole, if you'd like to focus on just the breakfast shows that those guys do, then that's fine. Okay, so we talked about Ofcom, and we talked about the regulator of the BBC, whose focus is to make sure the BBC is impartial and it delivers a broad range of programming to its licence fee payers. Radio 1 and its place as a PSB is quite controversial because it has quite a niche audience, as you will see. Radio 1's remit is to entertain young listeners with a distinctive mix of contemporary music and speech. Its target audience is 15 to 29-year-olds. And as a result of that particular focus, Radio 1 suggests that it offers a range of new music, it supports emerging artists, and provides a platform for live music, etc. Make some notes of these, please, but I'd like you to answer this question in your notes as well. If Radio 1 is just providing new music to a young audience, how can the BBC say that they are providing value for money from their licence fee? So the question is, how can the BBC say that they are providing value for money from their licence fee payers if they are providing an entire radio station for a niche audience? So that's it for today. A little bit of research done. Remember to do your audit for next lesson, which is going to be super important, and answer that final question within your notes or in your blog post. Best of luck.